When the narrative doesn't suit the gun grabbers, they don't change their position on guns, they change the narrative. The political left has always wanted to change the meaning of the Second Amendment because they know it's the only thing that stands in their way of gaining political dominance. They just hope you're not paying attention while they're doing it. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There's not much the gun grabbers can do with the shall not be infringed part. That ship has pretty much sailed for them because they haven't been able to redefine shall or infringe yet. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, that part doesn't work out well for them either. Well, at least as long as dictionaries still exist, but digital is working in their favor, and at some point AI will decide what those words actually mean. Being necessary to the security of a free state. Now, they have a struggle with this part, but have made several attempts at redefining the word necessary, or have decided that they, in many cases, the courts, will decide what's necessary for you as it relates to firearms and accessories. For example, in Bianchi versus Brown, the Maryland so-called assault weapons ban case in 2024, the Fourth Circuit Court upheld Maryland's ban on so-called military-style weapons. The court said that they are ill-suited and disproportionate to the need for self-defense. It explicitly stated that certain weapons may fall outside the Second Amendment because they exceed what is necessary for civilian self-defense. So apparently need is subjective. But let's look at the very first words of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia. Now, of course, we understand the word militia and firearm are completely different things, but somehow in the mind of the anti-gunner, they feel they can get away with claiming that well-regulated when referring to the militia is actually referring to firearms themselves. They like to make the argument that a well-regulated militia means that they can implement gun restrictions in modern day. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you have to understand the mindset of the anti-gun left-wing activist. Not only do they want you to believe things that aren't true, but they've also convinced themselves of such ridiculous notions. Now, in the article called Gun Laws and What the Second Amendment Intended by Michael Waldman, CEO and president for the Brennan Center for Justice, the author desperately stretches the boundaries of the English language, rational thought, and common sense in an attempt to make the argument that the phrase a well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment provides justification for firearm regulation rather than an unfettered individual right. So Waldman tried to make the claim that the clause, a well-regulated militia, somehow means government plays a role in regulation, and therefore gun laws are magically justified and applicable to the Second Amendment. Not only did Waldman's article take jabs at our founding fathers and pushed the typical left-wing race baiting, but it also tried to fabricate a different understanding of what the Second Amendment means. Well, if the radical gun grabbers believe it, then it must be true because, of course, it's their truth. And they have become accustomed to everyone accommodating their truth, regardless of how ridiculous their ideas may be. So what's really happening here is the gun grabbers are simply making things up in an attempt to trick as many people as possible into believing their nonsense and supporting unconstitutional gun laws. The real truth is, a well-regulated militia meant properly trained, disciplined, and organized. We know this because in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton actually spelled that out for us. In 18th century English, well-regulated didn't mean heavily controlled by government, but rather in proper working order or functioning as intended. For example, in Federalist number 29, Alexander Hamilton wrote that a well-regulated militia is the most natural defense of a free country. He explained that it requires a degree of uniformity in arms, discipline, and training so that citizens could act together effectively in defense of the nation. Hamilton's point? A militia composed of ordinary citizens must be trained and standardized enough to serve as a real defense force, not just an unorganized crowd of armed men. Nowhere, except in the minds of the left-wing gun grabbers, does the Second Amendment allow for or accommodate any idea of government regulation or oversight of firearms. It was in fact written to prevent exactly that. And just so there would be no confusion, the words, "the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed," was written. Thanks for watching Bullet Points. I'm Dan Wass for Gun Owners Foundation. You can find more Second Amendment content and updates at gunowners.com.